right? Like fans are going to start dreaming again. So that's just how I feel like these past 4 weeks in general have been. Welcome into Northside Territory, Foul Territory Network's Cubs podcast. I'm Sahadev Sharma. Patrick Mooney is on vacation this week, so we have a special guest. Patrick had Jesse Rogers on. I believe that was last week or 2 weeks ago. So we're going polar opposites here. As Jesse let everyone know, I'm Spin Rate, and with me today is Statcast, MLB.com's Cubs beat reporter Jordan Bastian. Jordan, thank you for joining the show. I believe you are an occasional listener, so you're familiar with Patrick's and my shenanigans, I guess. I don't know what that is. We're not too wild here. We stick to Cubs most of the time, but thanks for joining. Thanks for listening on occasion, and we can talk about this up and down Cubs team that has started to tease the fans and let them think that maybe they're getting back into it, but they're not. They're not getting back into this thing.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, after listening to that episode, I thought, yeah, you need to balance it out. I think we're going expected stats only in this episode. I'm gonna have to say via Statcast every sentence. I got my propeller hat on, so I'm ready to go. This team has been for the last couple weeks, you've seen those flashes of a team that looks like a team that should be in the playoff race. They've going back to July 4th. I think they've gone 16-12. I mean, that's not great, but it's been much improved compared to what we saw across May and June. They have these couple game stretches where the offense looks like what we kind of envisioned it would be. Not a top of the league offense, but a deep 1 through 9 above average across the board offense. I think that's what we all expected going into this year, and just certain parts of that lineup have bottomed out. And I think yesterday was another example of, you saw a pitcher that they hadn't seen, and he was facing hitters that, with that knowledge, and he leaned on a changeup more than he had all year. And all of a sudden, the whiffs were stacking up at a rate we haven't seen since like June for this Cubs team. And no one wants to hear the word June right now in relation to the Cubs offense. But for one day, that's what it was against the Twins and Festa.
Yeah, I mean, this is a slightly different team than the one we have been watching. I would be more optimistic in general about this team. I think they're not going to bottom out is how I look at these final 2 months. So this is going to be typical. They're going to tease. I think they dug themselves too big of a hole. Yep. One thing I know we have a kind of a plan of what we're going to talk about here. One thing I just want to touch on, a reason why they're different, of course, is Isaac Paredes. I think fans, this is typical for fans. They see it like the first week of a player. Jamer Candelario last year, first week, he was a stud, right? And then got hurt, never really played well again for the Cubs, and is like a below average bat this season, right? Like that's so the initial what you initially see can sometimes be what fans think the player is. Jamer or Isaac Paredes has been an above average every month this season, every month except for August so far. When I talk about above average, I mean offensively, his worst month was July, where he had a 102 weighted runs created plus and had a 340 on base percentage. Like he had an 18.9% walk rate in July. If that's your worst month, you'll take it. Like he's incredibly consistent. This is a minor slump, adjusting to a new city. He's my guess is he's fine. That's just a quick aside. I saw people panicking last night, like, what's wrong with this guy? Yeah, his strikeouts I think are a little up for him this month.
I mean, he actually has had, if you've watched the at bats, there's been some really good at bats in there that just have resulted in either a strikeout or a ball in play. But you've seen, like I know we pointed to it that night, but he had a 12 pitch at bat, ended in a strikeout the other night, and you can't draw a direct line, but there was a 5-run inning that happened after that. I mean, so we have seen little moments of those grinding at bats, which is what you want from a good hitter. When you're in a results slump, you want the at bats to still be impacting in some way, or to have a competitive at bat. We've seen competitive at bats, we just haven't seen the results yet.
Absolutely. I would not be concerned about him. He is pretty consistent. This is a third year in a row where he's performed at a high level offensively. If you want to look at bad luck numbers, like the last 2 months, including July and the start of August, like the BABIP numbers are just ridiculously low, like sub 130 numbers with the BABIP. He's going to be fine, and
nope,
he's actually hitting the ball pretty hard.
It's Wrigley, Sahadev. The pull power doesn't play in Wrigley.
Well, one player who is turning it around, and when we talk about small sample, this small sample is pretty impressive. Pete Crow-Armstrong is starting to look like a completely different hitter at the plate. I started to notice it. So at the end of right before the break, he had that 2-homer game, and I actually didn't love those homers. They the results, you'll take them, right? But the pitches he swung at are the types of pitches you don't want. He was swinging at and getting bad results on before. He was chasing too much, and he chased a couple breaking balls down, got them out, hit them out. Like, he had good results on pitches he probably should have swung at. And then the coming out of the break, he looked like the same guy, chasing way too much. I think he went on an 0 for 21 stretch there. Like, it was bad, and he was chasing still. In Kansas City, the second he got to Kansas City, that first game, I was like, ooh, this looks like a different guy. He started to get some results in Kansas City. First couple games of Cincinnati, line drives all over the place, didn't get results, but he's not chasing as much. He's making more hard contact. So this is a 3, 6, 9, 10 game sample now, including Monday night. He has an 8.8 strikeout rate. He has a 148 weighted runs created plus. You want to see more walks. I think he has 1 walk in that stretch. It's okay. He probably needs to start walking more. And I think you were there on Saturday when Dustin Kelly kind of talked about, like, he's not going to be seeking out walks, but there's a way that they'll come if he starts doing some damage.
Yeah, I think it's the old adage that walks for a hitter, especially of his kind of profile, are going to be the byproduct of just good pitch selection and good at bats. I don't think he's the type of player you go up there and say, hey, I want you to draw walks. You don't want Pete Crow-Armstrong hunting for walks. You want him hunting for doubles and triples, or getting on base and turning a single into a double with a stolen base. But the walks are going to be that he's starting to learn to recognize the pitches that he has been chasing. And I think what he's talked about too is he's starting to see some pitchers more than once. He's starting to get those mental reps, so he can know what a guy's going to in what situation, or just what the shape of his breaking ball looks like. That's going to be valuable as he continues to learn. And I think I was looking at his 15-game rolling on Fangraphs, Jesse and Mooney, you can tune out right now. But I think if you actually go back to late June, you can steadily see that swinging strike rate just in full decline. So that part of it has been in decline for a good month plus. And yeah, I think he started some drills with Dustin Kelly, really focusing on almost overemphasizing the weight distribution over his back leg, to really stay back when he was hitting. I think you wrote, he had conversations with Nick Madrigal about just his style of doing that. And how he tried to incorporate a little bit of that mindset where you almost feel like you're off balance or leaning back too far, but it's actually just forcing you to not get out front. And we've seen a lot of pulled balls into the right field corner, which as soon as he puts a ball into the right field corner, that's a double, for a guy with his speed. So I think we're seeing really, really improved swing decisions. We're seeing him just on time more lately because of some of the drill work he's been doing. And I mean, got to remember, this guy broke into the big leagues at 21? He's 22 right now. The expectations are so high for him. And, a player's peak is, I think we've learned, it's not necessarily 27 anymore. Maybe it skews a little younger than that. But, I mean, this guy still has multiple seasons until he's peak major league Pete Crow-Armstrong. It's hard to learn and develop in the big league level, and I think you hear a lot of people say that, but it's true. And you've got two examples this year of Pete Crow-Armstrong and Miguel Amaya, who they've made stance implementation changes that is the type of stuff that you would tell a minor leaguer to do in the minor leagues, and they're going, no, we need you to do this in the major leagues, try it out for a couple days and let's work from there. That's developing at the major league level, and I think we've seen tons of positive signs lately.
Yeah, and so much of when you talk about how it feels like he's almost leaning too far back or too much on his back leg, like so much of it is like these mental cues, and the feel can be different than what's actually happening,
right?
And you just have to, like, where are you comfortable with things? And when I was talking to Pete, a big thing that stood out to me is like he's getting a lot of advice, right? And that can sometimes be overwhelming. But what he's really good, it seems to be, like, filtering out what he needs and just taking. He's like there's only so many ways to do this, right? Like, everyone has different paths to success, but there's only so many ways that things can work out. There's you can't have, like, there's not like thousands of different things. So he's like trying to pick the things that work for him. Like, something that stood out to him was in spring training in the cage, like Dansby noticed he was doing too many things, and he was like, hey, just focus on the finish. Focus on the finish of your swing, and everything in the mindset is everything up the middle, hard up the middle. And that's something that he's just kept that. And like Talkman gives him little bits of advice. Cody Bellinger, he has all these veterans or really smart ball players just giving him little tidbits along the way. And the reason they're doing that is because they see the immense talent, right? Like, this guy's an elite defender in center field. We can hem and haw about what happened on Saturday. And listen, that was a bad play. It shouldn't have happened. The Cubs should have won that game. But he's still learning. Like you said, he's 22.
One thing I like too is, and Craig Counsell has used this example of that. It reminds him of Carlos Gomez when he first got to Milwaukee, and he said one of the differences there, and what you're talking about, all the advice that Pete's getting, all the advice that Pete Crow-Armstrong is getting from the staff, from his teammates, is how do we maximize your strengths and turn you into the best version of you. What Craig Counsell has said happened to Carlos Gomez was he was a similarly speed-based type hitter, and back in the day it was, here's what we want you to do because you are that type of player. And they would force hitters to be someone who they weren't. And it took them a long time, hey, get the ball on the ground, move the runner over. Like, you're the fast slap hitter type guy. With Pete, it's like, no, you have a dynamic skill set if we can maximize it. So let's focus on getting that out of you. But if you look at Gomez's his kind of career track record, his first 5 years, I was looking at this up, he was 73 OPS plus, so well below average. His ground ball rate was really high. And then you could see when he got to Milwaukee, there was less emphasis on ground balls. He's getting the ball in the air more. All of a sudden, that on base is ticking up. And suddenly he's getting MVP votes and is a two-time All-Star because he got his OPS plus into the 120 range. And I think, like, if you can get Pete Crow-Armstrong to that 95 to 120 range, 120 being like, this dude will get MVP votes because of his other skills. Like, it's like we talk about Dansby Swanson. If you can just be a league average or slightly above league average offensive player, that's superstar level. So I think, when you're talking about the all-around game. So I just thought that was an interesting example Counsell has leaned on of, this is a normal career trajectory for a young player. And in Pete's case, this is, let's emphasize your strengths, not make you do things that don't fit who you are as a player.
Yeah, and I glossed over it. I said the 8.8 strikeout rate over the last 10 games. I don't think he's going to be like a 12% strikeout guy, but right now he's like 23.6.
Right now you're seeing the best version of him.
Yeah, that's like 23.6 for the season. Like, after what he did last year, it was 19 plate appearances, not enough to really make grand conclusions, but still, like, that's solid. Like, his BABIP is way too low for his speed. He's this is fine. I know the results
Yeah.
aren't fully there for the full season, but this, like, I think Cubs fans, now that we've kind of seen like this stretch of like, oh wait, he can make adjustments, he can look good at the plate. I was getting to the point where I was like, whew, these chases on these sliders
Yeah.
are just like, that's unbearable to watch. Like, you have to adjust, and he did. So I think there's reason to be optimistic for fans. I think obviously the speed's there. You have elite speed, top 3, top 5 in the game speed. It's like Bobby Witt, Ellie De La Cruz, and Pete Crow-Armstrong, right? Like these.
Yeah.
This is an elite talent that, you know, if he starts to, like you said, 95, 100 weighted runs created plus, that is a great player with his defense in center field. It's starting to build some optimism. I think, you know, you don't want to get overwhelmed or overthink things for 2024, but 2025, like this, suddenly it changes the trajectory of things, and you feel a little bit more comfortable, and you start talking about depth and you know, all the options you have, and what Cody Bellinger is going to do as far as opting in, opting out. And you have different, you have a lot of options right now. And part of that, and we can shift here. They, like, council addressed this yesterday, but 3 guys move up from AA to AAA: Matt Shaw, Kevin Alcantara, and James Triantos. That's 6 top 100 guys at AAA, you know, including Cade Horton, who is hurt, but, you know, 5 position players: Moises Ballesteros, Owen Casey already there. Owen Casey's been there all season long. Moises Ballesteros is 20 years old. Like, they have a loaded AAA team, a bunch of position players on the cusp of coming up to the big leagues. You already have PCA and Michael Bush at the big leagues. There's a lot of young talent here, and not everyone's going to hit. Not everyone's going to become a Cub. Not everyone's going to impact this team as a Cub, but it is a good thing to see them get to AAA, to see them develop, to see them on the cusp of the big leagues, and finally feeling good about the system. As far as it's almost, I remember in 14, people would be like, who cares about these prospects, right? Because they're these intangible concepts. They're starting to become tangible now, and it's something fans can really grasp a hold of.
Yeah. It's one thing I've really liked since I've been, so I came over to this beat in 19, and maybe you can speak to what the development was like before that. I know you can. But one thing I've really liked of this sort of new player development regime is they're not timid to push guys that are young up the ladder, especially on the position player side. Before you would look at their age and think like, oh, they're ready for that level. I've really liked how fast they pushed Owen Casey up the level. You know, they drafted Shaw, and he said, I want to be pushed. I want to be in the big leagues. And one of the reasons he liked that the Cubs were the team that drafted him is he was confident they would do it. They've backed that up, and his performance has dictated it. James Triantos, who I think kind of flies under the radar a little bit just because of some of the other prospect names, he's been pushed and has answered the bell and moved up quickly and shown an incredible propensity for just not striking out and getting on base. And so I think that's been really impressive, and these guys have backed it up. And yeah, I think when you hear Jed Hoyer say at the trade deadline, like, yeah, this year hasn't gone the way that the Cubs have wanted it to go, but they still feel they're in a good organizational place foundation wise for the next 2 years. It's because of this. It's because you have this layer coming, and it's not necessarily plug and play guys. Oh, these are all going to be superstars, and you plug them in, and that's what top 100 means. It's you fill out a major league team with veteran major league players, and if something happens, you have this layer underneath that you can trust, can step in and fill in spots. And you know, maybe you pick one spot, Pete Crow-Armstrong, to say you're going to be the guy who's in the big leagues developing this year. We're not going to run the whole farm system up, and you're waiting for these guys to be baking down in the minor leagues, and when it's time, they're called up, and you can kind of trust like they're ready for this. And I think pushing them is a big part of that in terms of kind of aggressively moving them up that ladder.
Yeah, and fans are gonna wonder, where do they play? Where do they fit on the roster?
That's a good problem if that's what you're asking.
If you're asking, I mean, it's the same. That there was a too many shortstops joke we used to have back when it was Starlin Castro and Addison Russell and Javier Baez and Gleyber Torres. These things have a way of working themselves out. You don't want to overthink these things. It's good to have a lot of talent.
They have too many outfielders right now. So how do too many? What do you do?
Right. So it's how they utilize that talent, right? Like, how can they maximize? I hate to talk about them like they're not people, but how do you maximize your assets, right? That's how they think of it, and whether it's trading guys, whether it's playing guys in different positions, or whatever it may be. Matt Shaw, is he probably best at second base? Probably, yeah. But Nico Horner's locked in there right now. Does that mean that you don't consider you don't consider outside the box ideas in the offseason? I think you have to. This team didn't win enough this year. They haven't won enough this year. So you consider whatever you can to find ways to improve the team. And Jed was clear. He doesn't want to shake things up just for the sake of making changes. But I think at the deadline we saw that I think Patrick and I were both a little surprised that they were able to pull off the Isaac Paredes trade. So they're willing to be creative. Like they've done some creative things. Getting Michael Busch was creative. Getting Paredes was creative.
Also, I think the other important one is when you look at Jed Hoyer's track record of just making the move that he thinks is best for the team, despite Christopher Morel's fan favorite. You could think like, oh man, we can't trade that guy. Like, well, how will the marketing team react if we trade Christopher Morel or the core in 21? Oh man, it's getting rid of the whole core. Like, that's how are fans going to react? Like, I think he's made moves that have kind of stunned us, but stunned us in sort of the fan hat way. But when you're looking at roster construction, he's unafraid when that move is there to pull that trigger. And so I think, I think that gives some, I don't know if you want to say hope, but maybe just optimism that the way this season went, hopefully this front office will be unafraid to make something drastic to not necessarily shake things up, but reimagine what that core and what the lineup needs to look like, because you want to have feeder lanes to get the prospects up, but you also need to make a market improvement over this lineup when there's, to your point, over and over and over and over, when there's not a superstar anchoring the level of floor that you can expect.
The next question fans are going to have is when did these guys get up to the big leagues? I think, only one of them's on the 40-man. That's Kevin Alcantara. He's probably arguably the furthest away from getting to the big leagues. He also plays a position that he plays Pete Crow-Armstrong's position, and he's frankly really good at center field. Early on when they first acquired him, people were like, he's going to grow out of the position. He's not. He has these long limbs. He takes these long strides, and he can handle center. He's faster than he's stayed faster and more limber than people expected so far. And he's a plus center fielder according to all reports I get. That's another great problem to have. I think the closest, if they're not getting in contention, the person that makes the most sense is Owen Casey. He needs to be added to the 40-man after the season. You can stick him at DH. You can give him some time in right field if you want. There's ways you can find time for him in the final month if things continue to trend the way they're trending right now, which is they're on the outside looking in. If they get into this race, if somehow they're a game or two back and it's September, right? Then I think you throw everything out the window about 40-man stuff. Who can help the team, right? That like the thinking has to shift. We've talked to Jed long enough. Like, he's competitive. He's not going to be overthinking 40-man moves if you're in the race,
right?
Like he's going to consider that stuff if they're out of it. If it's still 5 games or whatever, 6 games out, yeah, September 1st, he's not going to be like, I'm calling up Matt Shaw, unless they decide like, hey, let's give him a cup of coffee this year and then bring him up to start next year and the whole rookie of the year stuff. And you know, like you can give him like they did with PCA last year. But again, last year they were competing. I do think that if they get in this race, then it's just like who helps the team. And then I would consider any of those guys except for probably Alcantara and probably Triantos, but Shaw, Ballesteros, and Casey would all be considered.
Yeah, and I mean, and fans also got to remember it's much different in September these days too, with the limitations on how many players you can call up. Like almost the days of the September call up are almost kind of gone. That's like a bygone era. Just in terms of like, oh, this kid will get a September call up. Let's take a look at him. That's just the roster rules don't really allow for that as much as it used to. I think we saw Canario was one of those where it was like he was up, but then he was optioned or he was delayed, brought up. I don't remember the exact order, but it was like because of the rules, they had to kind of be a little different with how they took a look at him down the stretch. So, but yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think if somehow they can chip a win off the deficit every week and pull back into the race over the last 7 weeks, yeah, you got to start considering that stuff. But I agree also that I think Owen Casey has kind of made the most sense for the longest now. Bellinger needing to stick into the DH role kind of hampers the flexibility of the roster at the moment. Once he can play the field, then Craig Counsell has more ability to rotate guys in and out of DH. And so if you eventually get to that place, Owen Casey would be a nice addition into that rotation. I think he's the one that makes the most sense.
Yeah, we'll see what happens over these final 7 weeks. I think Monday's loss puts a damper on hopes of getting back into this right now. But you could say that like every week if they win these next
every other one.
Yeah, if they win this series against Minnesota, they have 2 against the White Sox, and then it's like, and then the hope gets back up, right? Like fans are gonna start dreaming again. So that's just how I feel like these past 4 weeks in general have been. Up and down nature of this team. It's hard to find consistency, but I think that's why they are where they are. So Jordan, thanks so much for joining me on this episode. Sorry, I lost track of what I was saying because I'm thinking about what I need to do. I'll have my editors cut this out. Jordan, thanks so much for joining me. Jordan, you can find his work at MLB.com. Jordan Bastian, Cubs beat reporter. Appreciate you nerding out with me, giving Jesse and Patrick a run for their money, making sure that we don't only have meatballs on this show.
So you got to stay balanced.
Fair and balanced. That's what we are. This is Northside Territory. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Make sure to read Jordan's work at MLB.com. Make sure to read mine and Patrick's work and subscribe to The Athletic. We appreciate you all listening. Thanks, everyone. Take care.